Welcome to Native Exiles, Alderwood Community Church's podcast, where we talk about following Jesus and the tension of being in the world, but not of it. And the tension that we're talking about today is a highly debated topic in our world, in our churches as well. We're in the middle of a three-part series dealing with some kind of cultural hot-button issues and what the Bible has to say. This stems out of a project of our church where we try to define our positions on human sexuality, on human life, and on women in church leadership. This is part two, and we're going to dig into the topic of human life today. Steve and I have a conversation about what the Bible really has to say, what it doesn't say, and what it means for us as we love people and lead churches together. Let's jump in. Well, Steve, we are having a few weighty conversations. We're on part two of three of a series digging into some topics that are very prevalent in people's lives culturally, are maybe not 100% clear biblically, but the Bible certainly has something to say about these topics. We covered human sexuality last week. We're going to talk about human life today, and women in church leadership is ahead. So today, human life. And maybe we can just start by addressing the reality that people maybe are like, why is it called human life? Like, don't churches have positions on abortion? Are you just like rebranding this or what? And certainly we're going to talk about abortion today.
Right.
That maybe is like the most common cultural issue where the Bible's position on human life is applied. But the reason why we're talking about human life more broadly is because we're thinking theologically about what the scriptures have to say. Really, the scriptures have a lot to say about the value of human life. Abortion is one topic that applies to. There's actually many more. We're going to talk a little bit about some end-of-life issues today, as assisted suicide and kind of right to die movement issues have come up in huge ways of late. There's other issues as well that human life applies to, but we're going to try to take maybe a little bit more of a tack of saying, okay, what is the Bible actually saying, rather than just forcing the Bible to say one thing about one specific issue.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many issues, and obviously in a paper like we've produced for our church that's 3-4 pages long, we can only scratch the surface. But I think it's worth just reiterating that, we spent a long time as a pastoral staff, as elders, to really prayerfully, carefully, scripturally try to work through this. And I mean, our hope is just that we're giving a thoughtful response that's both compassionate but true to the Bible. And it's a humble effort on our part. We want to be humble, but we also want to try to show people that God is speaking into these issues.
Yeah, and I think part of that humility is just being transparent about where we're coming from. We're a couple of pastors. We're talking primarily theologically today about what does the Bible say. We're talking about issues that are incredibly personal. There's going to be people listening to this who have had abortions, who've been making decisions about abortions with a significant other. There's going to be people who, have family members who are very ill right now, thinking through end-of-life topics. And we're not coming today trying to say, like, we totally understand where people are coming from or what it's like to be in those situations or anything like that. We have a lot of humility about the fact that we don't know everything that people have gone through, and that's not where any of our kind of authority is coming from. We personally don't really have any authority on this issue. All we're trying to do is open up the scriptures and say, to the best of our abilities, what we think God's word is saying to us on the topic of human life.
Yeah, and with abortion maybe being the most standout issue for a lot of people under this topic of human life, we should probably point out the fact that we're well aware we are both men, and we have not gone through the pain that many women have gone through, including women that sit in our congregation every Sunday.
Yeah. So with that said, let's dig into it. And as soon as we come back from a short break here, Steve will have you read the short version of our statement on human life. All right, Steve, so we're unpacking a paper written by our church on this topic. It can be accessed. There's a link in the show notes for anybody who wants to hit pause on this and read the whole thing. We're not going to read the entire paper. It's a few pages, but there is a short summary section that just lays out our position on human life. Would you go ahead and read that for us now?
Yeah, this first paragraph is just really distilling it into its purest form. And says this: at Alderwood, we affirm that human life is a sacred gift from God and is to be cherished, protected, and honored at every stage. We believe that every human being bears the image of God and that ending a human life through abortion or euthanasia is an affront to the dignity of that life. Our position is rooted in the conviction that life and death belong to God alone and are not ours to determine. And then we follow it up with this other paragraph, which we actually included in all three of our position papers. And this might actually be my favorite part of it, just because I love the tone that we're trying to strike here. We do not expect everyone within our church family to agree completely on this issue. Our most strongly held beliefs and the beliefs required of all members can be found in our essential doctrine statement. Our position on human life, while important, is secondary to that. And we ask that our church family submit to it without causing division, while holding personal convictions about what the scriptures teach on this issue. For those in teaching and leadership roles, we require they teach Alderwood's position in good faith in whatever way they represent Alderwood.
Yeah, and we've talked about that a little bit in our previous conversation around human sexuality.
Right.
I think part of what we're trying to do in these papers is recognize a little bit of a balance of there are varying degrees of importance of things that we believe, and it's hard for us to kind of enter that space sometimes. I think it's very easy to be in that kind of black and white binary, like there's things that matter and there's things that don't. And what we're saying here is actually there's more than that. There are things that are very important, but are still not as important as the core beliefs of Christianity. And so that's why we have multiple things here. We have a doctrinal statement that says, this is what it means to be in the Orthodox Christian faith. This is what the church has always believed from the beginning. These are dividing lines between people who are considered to be a part of the family of God and those who are outside of that tradition. This issue on human life is not one of those things. It is not a part of what the kind of Orthodox formulation of Christian faith has been from the beginning. It's still important, and it's
hugely important.
It's super important. And yet it's complex. The Bible doesn't always give clear answers, even to important ethical issues. And so we know there's going to be people wrestling with this from different perspectives. There's going to be different nuances in the conversation that people might see differently. We're okay with that. And
I think for you and I as pastors, it's easy to picture people on both sides of the extremes that you kind of mentioned, the polarity. I can picture the person who might listen to what we're about to say in regards to euthanasia or abortion and be like, why are you're using nuance? What? There's no nuance. This is black and white. And then there's the other person, and you and I both talked to this person after a church service perhaps, who just says, why are you guys making such a big deal over this? And I think we'd ask, if you find yourself at those extremes or anywhere in between, give us a chance here to kind of unpack this and give you the core beliefs.
Hear us out. So there's really kind of three biblical principles that you just heard in that short version of our doctrinal statement. I just want to walk through them one at a time. The first biblical principle that we're laying out here is the reality that human life is created by God and bears his image. And that comes from the very first page of the Bible, Genesis 1:27. So God created man in his own image. He created him in the image of God. He created them male and female. And as basic as that is, it is like the most important biblical concept in this whole conversation, and it's important if you're a Christian and you know that passage and you know that we're created by God in His image, and you're just like, okay, next, like I get it. Stop for a second and just realize, since this is the most important distinction, recognize that it makes a lot of sense that what we believe about things like abortion, end of life, whatever, might be totally at odds with what the world around us believes. Because if you don't believe that first fundamental truth, that God created human life, then basically everything else we're going to say...
It unravels.
It unravels.
Yeah.
If human life is just an accident, a biological freak thing that happened, and the only way that human beings got here is an unguided process of evolution, then I don't know how to make a real strong ethical case about something like abortion. I don't know how you could. And you know, if someone's listening to that who believes in kind of a naturalistic worldview, what I would really press them on is like, whether you realize it or not, I'm not sure you have any moral basis for any concept of human rights at any stage of life. But that's for another podcast. So we believe something as Christians that is different from other worldviews, which is that human beings are not accidents, that we are created by God, the creator of all things. And more than just that, more than just believing that we are created by God, we believe that God created human beings in particular in a unique place in creation, that we alone are in the image of God. God created all life. He created everything in this universe.
All of which is a gift.
But human beings are the only ones that are said to be made in the image of God. And defining exactly what that means has been a really interesting theological conversation being had for thousands of years. But the basic concept is right there in the word. That word image, it's actually, interestingly, it's the word in Hebrew that's used for idols, for like statues.
It's icon, isn't it? And when it's translated into the Greek, yeah.
So selim in Hebrew. And so like, you know, in religious context, people who were worshiping false gods through idols, you had this statue or whatever that was a representation of the god that you were worshiping. And the idea was that that idol was kind of like showing you a physical
reflection or representation. Yeah.
And so there's this really interesting concept that the Bible takes that idea of idolatry and refashions it in the way that it explains to us how God created us, that we actually are the representation of God in creation, that we are the image, we're the picture of God's character, who he is, what he's like, and it's our job to represent him to all of creation. And that foundational biblical truth, it is what undergirds all Christian morality around human life. The historical Christian perspective on human rights, on the idea that, you know, human beings have inherent rights that aren't given by a government, that aren't given by, you know, whoever has the most power or whatever. That's like, it's just true that human beings have rights. That comes because of our belief that it comes from God, that he created us with dignity, with worth, with value, and that it's not a social construct that we have rights. Like it's part of how God created us to be.
As you pointed out here, it's in Genesis 1. So it's early on in the scriptures and God's revelation of himself. And if you take the time, folks, to read the rest of the paper, I mean, it is a thread that continues throughout God's word. But like you said, it's the foundation. It's the fundamental truth, which kind of leads into our second core point here. Human life is not ours to take. Unpack that a little for us, Wyatt.
Yeah, so part of this inherent value, like God has stamped his image onto every human being, means that to violate the rights of another human being, and in particular the right to life, to take another human being's life, is an affront not just to that person,
right,
but it's an affront to God himself. And that's why you have the ethic in the scriptures that murder is wrong. So I mean, it's one of the 10 commandments, put very simply in Exodus 20:13, do not murder. The whole principle of that is not just like, it's mean, or it's not even like really like a do unto others kind of thing where it's like, if you murder people, like people might murder you, like that. There's wisdom there, I guess, as well. But really it is this understanding that human life is something that is, it's not yours to meddle with, that God created it. God puts his image on human life. It is an affront against him to take innocent human life.
He didn't just create it. He values human life, and he loves each human life, right? That's a big part of why it's such an affront to God.
Now, here's kind of the interesting thing in this conversation, at least to me, is because if you know your Bible very well, if you've read the Old Testament a few times, you might raise an objection here, which is that it doesn't necessarily seem like God cares all that much about human life in the Old Testament.
Are you thinking of the flood, Wyatt? What are you thinking
Sure,
of?
that's a good early example. Is you have the
God
flood
wiping
story
out.
in Genesis. He wipes out every living creature on earth, including a lot of human beings. You have some of the really troubling passages in the conquest narratives in the Old Testament of God commanding people to go and wipe out whole cities, and certainly there's warfare passages where God commands His people to go and kill other armies. And so I think there's some people who would say like, this seems really inconsistent. Like you're saying God has this really high value of human life, and yet God seems to just be willing to just wipe people off the face of the earth. And so what gives? And one of the important distinctions here is that because God is the author of human life, because He puts His image on human life, it is always wrong for human beings to decide to take the life of another human being. That moral equation actually does not apply to God. God is the one who gives human life. He actually retains the right to take human life. And He will, by the way, for all of us. We kind of are renting our life from God in a sense.
No one's escaped that truth yet. Yeah.
Yeah. And that is just a reality of the universe that God gives. He takes away. He determines how many days He gives us. He, plans the steps that we take. And so He's not morally wrong ever for taking back the gift of life that He's given us. Human beings are wrong for doing that. And the part of where there's like some times when those two realities seem to be hard to separate is there are certainly stories in the Old Testament of God deciding that it's time to take back the gift of life from certain groups. Even capital punishment is an example of this, and using human agents to do it, right? So there's time when God commands people to take life.
So it almost seems like He's contradicting Himself.
But in reality, that is God exercising His right, using people as His agents. What's always condemned is, in any context, a human being on their own just deciding to kill someone, to take life because they're angry, because they feel wronged, because they don't care, and it doesn't matter if that person is a slave, if that person is a foreigner, if that person, no human being is ever given the authority to just decide on their own, I'm just going to kill
unilaterally.
These people. Yeah. So those are the two kind of foundational points. God creates human life. It has a unique place of value and dignity in all of creation because human beings are made in the image of God. Because that's true, human beings are not ever allowed to decide to take human life on their own. Doing so is an affront to God Himself. But then our third biblical point there.
Can I just say one word there, Wyatt, to close that? Because, I think it's really important to recognize in what you said that there's a tension there. Like, God does love and value. We don't want to lose sight of the fact that that is why it is so terribly important that we value life as well, because God is a loving God who graciously gives life. And, to your point a minute ago, He also has the ability and the right to take life away because ultimately He is God and He is our creator. So I just never want to lose sight of the tension between He is God, but He is a good and a kind and a loving and gracious God.
Absolutely. And maybe, again, before we move on to the third point, we can just pause here and say, this is why issues like abortion have become huge issues within the church.
Polarizing.
More so than just political issues.
Yeah.
Is because if you accept these two biblical principles, then it's pretty easy to see how that could apply to something like abortion, where you have a human life, a vulnerable human life in the womb. If you believe that human life is created by God, made in the image of God, if you believe that it is wrong for human beings to take that life, that is what we're talking about when we're talking about abortion. And so that is why we believe that this position on human life gets you to a place of saying that abortion is wrong. you can see how these two biblical principles are at play in something like conversations around end of life and assisted suicide and issues like that, where it's actually this reality that God created human life, that He values human life, that it's His to give and take away. It actually applies to yourself as well, even your own life.
So if I'm understanding you right, you're saying that there are those who are going to lean into the loving side of God maybe and say, well, where's the compassion in not allowing someone to take their own life if they're suffering? Or where's the compassion in bringing an unwanted child into the world and maybe intervening? Like, is that the tension you're pointing to that it is so polarizing for some people? Like, some would just say, well, it's God's right and you don't ever have the right to mess with human life. And others who are saying, but wait a minute, where's the compassion? Where's the love? Is that the tension you're pointing to?
Well, I think there is some tension there where compassion can be a motivation for all kinds of things in these conversations, right? I mean, compassion is absolutely a part of the reason why many pro-choice people support a woman's right to have an abortion. It's the compassion for a mother in a spot where she's not capable of, or feels like she's incapable of raising a child on her own. It's a compassion for somebody who's been the victim of some sort of sexual assault. It's compassion for somebody who just doesn't have the social support, the financial support to be able to raise a child in a way. And yet, the reason why, by and large, the church, not universally, but nearly universally, has still opposed things like abortion, even super compassionate people, much more compassionate than me. Why even, those people have said, but we can't support abortion, is because of these foundational ethical truths taught in the scriptures that God says, human life is mine. I give, I take away. It's not yours to meddle with. It is wrong to take human life. And so that's why these biblical truths have such a powerful voice in these conversations.
And so we're kind of dancing around our third point here, right? We're wrestling with this tension. Grace and compassion must accompany truth. Like, what does that look like in our practice? How do we apply that?
Well, and that's where I think, unfortunately, at times, churches, Christians have gotten a little bit of tunnel vision on a topic like this, where the passion to protect the vulnerable, the passion to stand up for the value of human life, has allowed us at times to forget that our job isn't just truth. Our job is grace and truth. That's what Jesus embodied, that's how Jesus taught, that's how Jesus engaged with people. And there's another, I think, kind of cultural factor in how we've gotten off the rails at times in that, which is that, especially a topic like abortion, is heavily politicized. And in our day today, nearly every political conversation is boiled down to black and white, good and bad, good people and bad people, enemies and friends. And so at times, the church has been really clear on a position against abortion and not very compassionate, not very loving, not very understanding towards people who either have had abortions, are sitting in their pews, going through an unwanted pregnancy, even in that moment, trying to figure out what they're going to do next. And so that's just our reminder in this third biblical point that the church's job is to represent the love of God, which includes truth, which includes grace, which includes mercy. And that this topic, when we're talking about human life, when we're talking about abortion, we're talking about people who disagree on this topic, we're not talking about something that is separating people into categories of good and bad. That's not what the gospel is. That's a misrepresentation of what we believe as Christians. We've all fallen short. We've all rebelled against God in our own way. The gospel is that God's grace and love and mercy is available to us all. And so however the church is going to represent a position like this, it has to be done in that context, representing that reality through our words and our actions.
And it also means that while we hold to the truth and we do our best to represent and reflect God's truth, the church is meant to be a place of healing. And like you just said, every one of us is broken. Every one of us has broken God's law. And so And we want to be a place where people show up and don't feel stigmatized or like I could never walk into this place because they're going to know what I did and judge me. We want to be a place where, let's be specific. We keep coming back to the issue. It's not the only issue, but someone who's had an abortion is every bit able to receive the grace and love and mercy of God, not only from God, but from the rest of us broken sinners who've received his love and grace. We want to be that kind of place.
Absolutely. Yeah. So let's pause here. And when we come back, let's dig into some of the nuance we've been talking about a little bit, some of the specific questions on the text we're talking about, some of the specific kind of examples in the world around us and what a position like this has to say towards those things.
Well, as we've said several times now, these are not issues and questions that lend themselves to easy answers, but I'm sure many in our audience, and even you and I, as we've been working through this, have had a variety of questions swirling around in our heads. How about I fire a few questions at you?
Yeah, let's go for it.
So I think a big question for people is, how does the Bible speak to the beginning of human life? I mean, that's a central core argument as people talk about abortion. Does the Bible clearly tell us when human life begins?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think you're taking a little bit easy on me, actually, because I think the way that this is framed often from people who have dug into this is like, hey, like, you guys are just overstepping here. The Bible doesn't say anything about abortion.
Right. You can't look in your concordance and look up abortion, moment of conception. I mean, it's not there.
Right. And so, that person would be making the case that there's this huge assumption in our argument, which is that, especially on the issue of abortion in particular, that whatever's going on inside the womb is a human life. And this person's going to argue like the Bible just doesn't teach that. It doesn't ever say that, there's a human life in the womb. And I want to acknowledge that there's a partial truth there. So one, I want to say, like, the Bible might say a little bit more than you realize on that. So, I mean, some of the classic passages that Christians will point to are things like Psalm 139.
Right.
This psalm praising God for his work even in pregnancy and life inside the womb.
And doesn't it say, you knew me in my mother's womb?
Yeah, for it was you who created my inward parts. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I will praise you because I've been remarkably and wondrously made. Your works are wondrous. I know this very well. So this creation of life, even before birth, is actually described in the scriptures. You have the really interesting story of Jesus and John the Baptist having like this moment of recognition when they're both in the womb, in their mother's wombs, and that's not a passage about the beginning of human life.
Right. I mean, can't I just say that that's like poetic license? Or, I mean, the Psalms are mostly poems. This is not literal language necessarily. I might object.
I mean, yeah, I would say like, you can say both those things are true at the same time. That yes, Psalms are worship songs, which means they're not just scientific treatises, but also that like the words they're saying do have meaning, and they are making some sort of statement and argument here that you can't just wipe away by using the word poem. And that story of Jesus and John the Baptist is not about when human life begins, but it does rely on a framework of understanding that Jesus was a real person at that time, that John the Baptist was a real person at that time, that they had, even individual identities and the ability to, recognize one another and whatever. And is it poetic? Yes, but it's showing you that the concept the biblical author has there is that these are human beings. That being said, what I will acknowledge is that Christians maybe have overplayed what these passages are saying at times. So like you have a passage like Psalm 139, talking about God knitting us together in our mother's womb. And you have the Christians saying like, there it is, like the Bible clearly teaches that life begins at conception. And that's where I would say like, okay, I wouldn't go that far necessarily. If you know anything about the history of scientific understanding, the biology of pregnancy, of human life, no one in the time of the biblical authors had accurate scientific understanding of conception itself.
Zygote is also not in my concordance.
Correct.
Yeah.
So if you're asking the question like, did the biblical authors believe life begins at conception? The answer is they did not know what the word conception meant. That's
right.
not, you're asking the wrong questions at that point. But where I would say we have to understand where this ethical conversation is actually taking place is that the reality is that biologically speaking, whether or not human life begins at conception is actually not even really a part of this debate. So non-Christians in the scientific world basically universally agree that human life begins at conception, scientifically speaking. That's not where the abortion debate is being held. And it's because it's just an objective question that is kind of incontrovertibly true. And so there's just three simple parts to this. And again, like people might be skeptical here that this is, I'm a pastor. I mean, Google this, man. This is not like Christian teaching. This is just science. At conception, from that moment on, there is a new organism. The zygote is an organism. Is it human? Yes, it is human. Is it unique? It's not the mother. It's not the father. It has its own DNA, and it's alive. So, and that's why, scientifically speaking, that question is just settled. Human life does begin at conception.
So what is the rub? What is the question?
So here's the rub. So if you want to make kind of an argument that it's ethically okay to eliminate that human life, the only way to make it is not with a scientific argument that there's not a human life there. The way to make it is a philosophical argument that even though that is a human life, it's not a full human person. So it's this idea of separating personhood from life. So the person trying to make the moral case for abortion being ethically permissible is saying human personhood develops at some point later, and human people have rights. But until personhood has been established, the zygote, the embryo, it's not a person, doesn't have human rights. There's really no ethical constraints on us of what we do with that
So
thing.
it could be first trimester, third trimester, post-birth. It could be anywhere in there.
Yeah. And people have different reasons, different answers for where they might say, like, this is when personhood begins. What I'll say to that argument is that I think it is a very dangerous path to head down to start separating human lives and personhood. And if I can just kind of like look at that from a few different angles, like for one, if you're a Christian, if you draw your ethics from what the Bible teaches, we can just acknowledge straight away, like the Bible never draws any sort of distinction between personhood and life. That's a modern kind of construction to try to navigate some of these ethical issues. When you're reading the Bible, humans who are alive are people. There's no distinction being made there. But many people making this case aren't Christians. They're not drawing this position from the scriptures. What I would say, even to people who don't really care what the Bible has to say about that, I would say, one, as we just said, science has nothing to offer that will help you make a distinction between human life and personhood.
Pinpointing that moment, we can't do it.
No, I mean, people can try to use science to like make a framework. Like maybe personhood begins when the brain's developed to the point that someone is self-aware. Maybe human life begins when the body has developed to the point that it's no longer dependent on the mother. So you can like use scientific timelines, but it's not like there's any scientific way to answer the question, when does personhood begin? You have to admit that you're kind of making it up. My warning would be, ethically, the separation of human life and personhood has been done many times in history on many issues. I'm not just talking about abortion. It has never gone well. It has never been a good thing. History is littered with horrible acts done in the name of people not really being full persons. Like some examples of that. The eugenics movement of the 1900s that was sterilizing people against their will was largely this very argument that disabled people, mentally ill people, even the poor, that they're not people in the fullest sense that we are, and therefore it's justified to not respect their rights and really to remove them from the gene pool, because us full people shouldn't be tainted by these lesser people. That kind of argument was present in all the justifications, not just in America, but across the world, for racism and slavery. This ethnic group, they're not like us totally. They're
in the South. Wasn't a person of African descent like 4/5 of a person or something?
Yeah, you have the 3/5 compromise between the North and the South, and that was a legal measure, not necessarily saying that you're like literally 3/5 of a person, but absolutely it's taking away from the full personhood,
the dignity. Yeah.
So I mean, that kind of argument's been used to justify slavery, the concentration camps of World War II, all these different things. Colonialism. People showing up from the Western world and having no problem enslaving, putting to death the quote unquote savages of the native people. All of that was this idea that we might all be human, but this group, this person, either based on their capabilities, their race, their level of knowledge, whatever, they're not people in the fullest sense of the idea like we are. And so historically speaking, I just would really challenge people, if you're going to use an argument like that on an issue like abortion, be careful.
You got to recognize
that's... It's not just a slippery slope argument. It's like, understand what you're logically opening the door for beyond even what this issue is. And even if, there might be some possibility of human life existing that's not a full person in the sense, I would just caution, do you have the authority, the ability to determine when that, this really is one of those issues of who but God can actually make that kind of determination. And do we, as fallible, finite human beings, really have the confidence to be able to say, we know when this human life has actually attained the status of full personhood?
That's a weighty one, Wyatt. And I have another weighty question for you. I think you and I both, as we worked on this together, we thought through some of the questions that people would be thinking about bringing up. And I think about women who maybe have undergone an abortion or have someone in their family who's struggling to make a decision. And I think it is easy for a lot of people to overlook the pain or the desperation a young mom who's experiencing unwanted pregnancy might be facing. She doesn't have money. She doesn't have resources. She doesn't have community. Isn't it harsh to demand that she keep a baby that she may very well not be able to take care of?
Yeah. Yeah, this gets kind of to that question of compassion that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
And, I just acknowledge that this is, I think, kind of the weightiest piece of this conversation to me, as a lead pastor who's leading our church through defining where we stand and what we're going to teach is, in a way we're speaking on behalf of God on this issue, and what we write, what we say on a topic like this as we explain the scriptures is going to affect real people in incredibly real and profound ways.
Because it's one thing for us to pronounce our judgments and assessments and theological understandings, but it's another thing for you or I to stand up on the stage on a Sunday morning and look out over a congregation of 400 people and recognize, there's many people in this room who've had abortion. There are probably some in this room who are struggling with, will they or should they? And that, you're right, that gets very real. It's no longer abstract. It's no longer theory.
Mm-hmm. And I would hate to think that I'm adding to a burden for someone who's already in such a difficult place. For a 16-year-old girl in our church who has an unwanted pregnancy and feels like the world is ending and has no idea what to do, the last thing I would want to do is misinterpret what God said and make that moment harder
Totally.
for her. So that there's weight there. What I really come back to is kind of where we started with the grace and truth together. I care about the truth. We want to be clear on what we think the Bible says. Also, we can never think that that is the end of our contribution to a topic like this, and especially with abortion. Like, the church's job is every bit as much to love people who find themselves in this situation, to have grace, to have compassion, to support materially, to support relationally, to not be a place of judgment so that people feel like they can actually go through things like this, not in hiding and not in secrecy.
Even have the conversation and share their struggles. Yeah, I mean, over the years, I have seen the church do this well, and I've seen the church do it really, really poorly. And I think it bears mentioning, we've talked a lot about the image of God, like, it is sort of a designation, a dignity that we carry in the way God made us, but it's also something we're called to do. We are called to image God, especially people who name the name of Jesus, and that compassion has to shine in that moment. I think of a gal that I knew here at our church many, many years ago, and she found herself as a late teen with an unwanted pregnancy. And I mean, it was past the point when it was showing that she finally came clean, and thankfully she was still around here, but she said, I am desperate and I don't know what to do. And it was awesome. That was one where I really couldn't have been more proud of our church, because people rallied around her. They loved her. They encouraged her. They offered her support both before, during, and after the delivery of that child. And I mean, I think it is easy for us to stand either behind our theory or our judgment as Christians sometimes and not do what Jesus would do, which is come alongside, help, take real, actual actions and measures that impact that person's life.
Yeah, absolutely. And, from a church-wide perspective, it's why I'm so proud of what we do at Alderwood in partnering with Cascade Women's Health and being able to provide real material support to people in unwanted pregnancies, not based on whether or not they make the decision we want them to make, not
or agree with us on everything,
not if they are Christians or not, but just we want to love people in the moment when they need it the most. And that's every bit as important as us being clear on what we think the truth is. And so, yeah, I mean, I would say that I think creating that culture where love is going to be first, and people don't feel the judgment of,
the weight of staring eyes and judgmental.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I want for our church.
For sure. And so, I mean, I'm mentioning a good memory that I have, but I mean, it's not always good, right? Sometimes there's some ugliness.
Yeah. And I mean, I would love to just pat our church on the back, but it's not always easy to navigate something as hard as this and do it in a way. And I know that our church has made mistakes, that I've made mistakes. I've seen it. I remember one evening being in a small group, and it was a group where there were some newer people that didn't all know each other, but like I knew more about everybody there than they knew about each other. And I knew that one of the couples in our group, as a part of their history, had an abortion, and that wasn't something they shared very freely, but we were close enough that I knew that. And I don't even know how the topic came up. It wasn't like that was what the small group was about or anything like that. But I remember this couple in that living room that evening talking about abortion, not saying anything that like I necessarily completely disagreed with content-wise, but just with a tone and an attitude of talking about, abortion is obviously murder, and anybody who can't see that is just, deluding themselves and whatever. And I'm just listening to this, like cringing and like wanting to just kind of jump out of a window, knowing how it's being heard and received in that room. Like the mistakes we make here can have really impactful ripple effects.
And to your point, unknowingly. Right? Yeah. You don't even realize what you're doing.
And what the church has to recognize is like, if you care about this issue, you care about protecting the life of unborn people, then you have to know that creating an atmosphere of judgment materially affects that world. It makes it more likely for people to hide unwanted pregnancies, to choose abortion because they just can't come out in the open and feel like they're going to be accepted. Like, the more loving we can be, actually, the better we can serve not only moms in those situations, their partners, but also these unwanted babies. And for us to be able to have an effect here, we have to be able to have conversations in the light and to create an environment where that can happen, which is so hard to do at times.
Yeah, grace and compassion have to accompany truth. Okay, Wyatt, we promised that this paper is not only about abortion. And so in our remaining 34 seconds, can you talk about other hot button issues like physician-assisted suicide and IVF? Do we touch on those, Wyatt, in the paper?
We do, yeah. So we do believe that this position on human life has a pretty straightforward application towards suicide, including physician-assisted suicide, and this goes back to kind of what we talked about with why murder is wrong. So what we said earlier about that is that if you choose to take the life of another human being, that is an affront against that human being, but it's not only that, it's an affront against God because of the way that God creates and values that human life and puts his own image on that human being. And that's why, ethically, what that means is that suicide is wrong. Now, for people who have more of a Catholic background, I want to just acknowledge, there are movements within the church, and Catholic theology was kind of known for this for a long time, that kind of put suicide in a category unto itself, where suicide was an unforgivable sin. You couldn't repent of that sin after you had killed yourself, and so it meant that you would never be able to be absolved and forgiven, and brought into the new heavens and the new earth. And I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that it is this unique, unforgivable sin, but the reason why suicide is wrong is because the value of our life doesn't come from our own will and our own decision that we value our life. Our value comes from God's decision to create us and put his image on us, which means even you don't have the right to take your own life. And so we do say that, as hard as end-of-life issues can be, we actually think that God is saying our lives are in his hands, that he's the one who directs the course of our lives, that numbers our days, and it's wrong to put ourselves in his place in making that decision for him. I want to caveat that a little bit. Not saying it's wrong to remove life-sustaining measures. I mean, that's one of the weird things of our modern world, is that we have the ability to keep a body alive long
in ways
past.
that human life has not known since the beginning of time.
So we're not talking about taking somebody off of life support or removing a feeding tube or anything like that. We're just talking about the ethics around actually choosing to end someone's life proactively.
Yes.
But then there are also a myriad of other issues in this realm that are just beyond what we can address in this paper. And so if you think about, issues that touch on the value of human life, you have issues around pacifism and, the ethics of taking life in war.
Self-protection.
Yeah, self-defense, exactly. Somebody breaks into your home, is threatening your family. Is it justified to take life in that case? And when you think about Christian ethics, those questions are difficult. There's never been broad agreement in the church on those issues. And in part, it comes down to, are those scenarios where God has authorized human beings to take life using his own authority? And there's different arguments on different sides of that. We don't get into that in that paper. We don't have a stance. We're not trying to, to sway anybody towards one side of those very complex issues. Really, the two cultural issues that we see right now that we think have a really clear application from the biblical principles are life in the womb and these end-of-life decisions, where we're just saying, it's God's, not ours, to determine when it's appropriate to end a life.
And to go back to our statement at the beginning, we really desire to be humble and to be open. And so we want to invite the possibility of conversation and questions. Wyatt, if somebody had some questions for us, I'm happy to give them your phone number right here on the air.
My address, my phone number.
Yeah, exactly. Well, how would they get in touch with us?
Yeah, we'll throw something in the show notes. But people can reach out to us anytime. Reach us at amcc.org, and we'll get back to you. I'd love to have a conversation. If you want to ask what we believe, you want to tell us we're crazy, tell us we're wrong, anything like that, we'd love to engage. And yeah, I think we'll leave things here.
Well, I want to just thank you, Wyatt, honestly. I mean, you put a ton of work into these papers. It wasn't, a single effort on your part. You worked with, as we said earlier, us, the pastors and the elders. But I know you were the first one to sign your name to this, and you worked tirelessly and prayerlessly on it. Or prayerlessly. I think very prayerfully on this. And I really think you did a great job with the paper. So thanks for the hard work.
Thanks. Yeah, I think one of the things we owe people as leaders is clarity on what we stand for, what we believe, and even when that's hard, even when that means we're going to disagree at times, we're going to have to push back and love each other well through some disagreements. But that's been my hope, is that that's what we're giving people. That this is what we think the Bible has to say on this topic.
Good stuff. Thanks, Wyatt.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us on this episode of Native Exiles. This is meant to be more than just listening to the musing of Steve and Wyatt over really tough issues. As we shared in the podcast, we want to be careful and prayerful in dealing with this. And we really want to invite you to check out next week's episode. Pastor Wyatt had an opportunity to interview Kendra Dahl, who has a fascinating story. She's a women's ministry leader and author who had a very difficult experience of having an abortion at age 16 herself, and is very open and candid about her struggles and working through these issues. So we hope you'll join us for that one, and we'll look forward to seeing you again next time on Native Exiles.